Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Maqbool with you at PTV WORLD. And as always in the debate, we try and bring you stories from around the world and talk about all the different aspects of that story so that, of course, we are able to give you a complete picture. One very important story in our show today really deserves a complete picture so that the world actually knows what has been going on and what is still going on today. We're talking about the situation in India. We know that India is going to be celebrating its Republic Day tomorrow on the 26th of January. This, of course, is a day that is celebrated every year to mark the Indian Constitution coming into effect. And, of course, Indian Constitution has always claimed it to be a secular state. However, we know that this is far from what the real situation on ground is. We know that the kind of regime India has in place at the moment and for many decades before this as well. We've seen how the entire institution has deteriorated into a more Hindutva-based region, and because of that, the way minorities and other people in India have suffered, with, of course, specific reference to the people in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir and the kinds of human rights violations and atrocities that the people there are being met with. This, of course, begs the question, why is this day actually being celebrated when they're far from what the initial stance was in terms of the Indian Constitution and how India came into existence and what it was meant to be. With regards to how we see what has unfolded in the past and what is being happening at the moment, we'll discuss and explore in further detail how India's journey from a so-called secular state to what it is right now with the Modi regime in place is there. What are the reasons for it? What sort of angles and issues do we need to address further in order to highlight the actual reality and position that India holds at the moment in the international arena? So we'll explore all of these issues in further detail. We'll also be looking at the situation within Pakistan, where we've seen that the Interior Minister Sheikh Rashid Ahmed, addressing the Senate session yesterday, has spoken about an increase in terror attacks in Pakistan. He has said that the terror incidents in the country have increased since August 15, since the Taliban took over power in Afghanistan. He has also talked about how the government is open for negotiations with the banned Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. At the moment, he clarified there are no talks going on, but they're open for these negotiations to happen with respect to the Constitution. How exactly does the government plan and strategize to deal with the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, specifically in light with the NSP? And then, of course, moving forward, how do we see the measures taken as a unanimous front by the political parties in Pakistan and the kind of issues that are in place, because of course the Interior Minister has also called for the inflation march to be called off, keeping these issues in mind. As you can see, I've been joined by Farrukh, Pitafi and Faisal as usual in the studios. Before we continue our discussion and also welcome our guest online, let's take a look at this report.
The 26th of January marks the date of the Indian Constitution coming into effect that turned India into a republic with an aim of making it a secular state. These words, however, remain merely restricted to the Constitution, as the reality is exact opposite. With its fascist Hindutva regime, today's India is anything but a secular state. Ethnic and religious minorities face cruelties as India tries to hide its horrendous crimes on global stage. The brutalities in Nagaland, Assam and Kashmir, alongside the atrocities against farmers and Sikhs, have made India a failure as a federation. Indian minorities look for separate homelands to achieve basic life facilities which they are devoid of under India. For now, the so-called Union of India seems to be on the verge of explosion from within, resulting in complete chaos for it in the coming times.
Well, you saw the report, and that, of course, is a situation in India at the moment and has been for a while now. We've been joined by Brigadier Retired Mr. Haris Namaz, who's a senior analyst. Thank you so much for joining us on the debate, sir. With regards to, of course, the Indian Republic Day that is going to be celebrated in India tomorrow, we really must look at the journey that India has been on since its inception, how it started off calling itself a secular state, a name that seems that it does not deserve to call itself anymore. With regards to the kind of situation and evolution that we've seen in India, moving from a secular state to now being largely dominated by the Hindutva ideology, where would you see this turn taking place in history?
You see that the point, and that is very important, that Indian Constitution, which was rewritten, of course, in 1950, 27 January, it clearly the preamble is that it has a sovereign socialist, then of course a secular Republic of Democratic Republic of India. Now that is the constitution. And what are they celebrating tomorrow? When they have turned it into a Hindu state, they are trying their best. They're causing atrocities on all minorities, irrespective of Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Dalits, and then of course all Mizo, Nagas, and there are a lot of insolent movements. So I don't know what they will be conveying a message to the world and to their own community that they have changed the total constitution of India. Before 3 years, it was run by the Colonial Government Act of 1935, and then they changed it. And very clearly written, it provides equality, liberty, and fraternity to the all people in India. So now it is all total Hindu state, and then it is they're talking about RRS, they talk about Akhand Bharat, and they want to convert it into Hindu state, and particularly even Dalits are not taken as a part of Hindu state. They take it only for upper class Hindus. So this is the reality, and I think they have no face to celebrate Republic Day of India tomorrow. What face from on the Red Fort when he will go and flatter the flag of India and Tiranga? What he will convey? This is what you are doing with the Muslims. This is what you are doing with the Kashmiris. What about Sikhs? All the minorities. That means they are now going for genocide. There are a lot of publications. Everything is there where they were very clear saying it is the start of mass genocide of Muslims. After
Right,
that,
you
of
talk
course, it's
about,
going to
Mr. Harris, you talk about equality, and of course, that is what the Indian Republic Day seems to be talking about as well. And of course, we know that isn't the situation on ground, but it still seems that they still are able to somehow claim that and get away with that. That sort of a role or garb that they wear, that they are in fact a secular state, that they are in fact a democratic state, they are a responsible state. All of these labels that seem to not fit with the Indian regime at the moment, considering the situation on ground. But it seems that they can still say that without consequence. Why is that?
because the problem had been in Pakistan, their place. Pakistan would have been in thick soup. It's a big country. It is a more a trade business, and then of course India is being used as a proxy against China, against South China Sea. They have got a Quad group. We already know it, and then they are being used against Pakistan to ensure we don't contribute with the CPEC. We don't get economic prosperity. So there are a lot of interest in the world. Our Muslim countries having a big trade with the Indians, and that is why they are not talking about Kashmir. That's why the Islamic conference couldn't be held, and they couldn't have a resolution about Kashmir. So the fact is that as long as the world thinks of equality, liberty, whatever we talk about them, that's why the United Nations are formed to finish after say Second World War, then there should be no conflict in the future. But then it's controlled by certain big powers, big P5. You can't help it because they have your own interest. Otherwise, who doesn't know what is happening? If East Timor can be liberated, Sudan you can see, what all is happening there, then why not Kashmir? It's a long United Nations agenda. And Nehru went himself and he went and keep crying that please have a ceasefire and we accept plebiscite and we'll do everything. Then how things have
Right.
changed and how the world is looking towards the other side. So this is the issue we are facing, and that is what is that when we want that Pakistan should have economic prosperity, bring foreign investment, increase the interest of the world in trade in Pakistan, then everybody is going to support Pakistan. That should be the theme for Pakistan. That is what is we were asking for CPAC. And
Right.
we
What
everybody
about when we look,
understand.
when we explore India further? What about the kind of separatist movements that we see within India? A lot of the states seem to be unhappy as well with the regime in place, and that, of course, should be able to put a sort of a political conflict for the people in power, for them to be able to take this seriously or do something about it. Even if perhaps this is something that when we see in terms of the Muslims there, or in terms of occupied Kashmir, there is, of course, an internal discussion as well, or an internal problem as well, with regards to how to govern India. Is that so?
I mean, that's a big, I foresee a big problem coming in very near future against India. This Narendra Modi is going to the factor to break India into different states. If Soviet Union can be converted into 15 states, with a lot of might, and that military might is still intact. Indian army is untrained, unprofessional. They don't know, and they don't have trust in their leadership about their soldiers. If that is happening,
Right.
that means they're fast moving toward breakup of India. And that is
Yeah.
what is Kashmir is standing out. Then, of course, we know the Sikh movement next year, 23rd March, we know what is like going to have at 2023, Sikh is going to have for referendum. Nagas, Mizos, Assamese, and Anselite movements. And then, of course, against the Christians. You remember in Christmas in Kolkata, in Cathedral Church, what happened? He blocked getting funding for Mother Teresa's fund. And that was it because they never wanted Christianity should come into India, and a lot of charity works are being done. So the point is, I am sure the writing on the wall that I am seeing in our lifetime, India getting into a small states. And Narendra Modi is going to be the factor along with the Tola of four, that is Amit Shah, Rajnath Singh, Ajit Deval. They are following the vision of and of total of RRS, and that is what is taking towards the right to the destruction. The moderate Muslims, they are modern Hindus, they don't like it. They are against it.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Right.
then,
Yes,
but
Faisal.
they are
Yeah,
for it.
sir. Brigadier Harris, sir, I know obviously there are certain separatist movements going on. If I'm not wrong, in Seven Sisters, we have more than 117 separatist movements, smaller and the bigger ones. And when we talk about India and China face to face right now, we know that Indian media, as you extensively appear on Indian media as well, and you know about it, that they keep on obviously, highlighting the Western China, obviously related to ETIM, and there are certain intelligence as well that RAW is funding ETIM wherever they see an opportunity. So could we see that out of these 117 separatist movements, China would be, of course, poking its nose in there as well, and we could see lots of things going on in the Seven Sisters, sir?
Definitely, because China is really unhappy with India. Not only that it's on the Ladakh border, but then there's a direct interfere in their internal affairs. And RAW is funding, of course, the East Muslim Turkestan movement, which is working against Uyghurs in Western China. The problem is India is getting into trouble so far because they are being used as a proxy, and then American they need them badly against China because that's the only counterforce they have in this region, and that's the reason they wanted Kenya should be their darling, and that's what they are doing all the time. They are getting S-400 from Russia. They have no problems. Where they put sanctions in Turkey because they are getting S-400. So now things are being changed. I think Americans are realizing that India has not delivered them. They have failed to deliver what American wanted from them in East China, in Ladakh, in Kashmir. They have played their part, but not much. Then, of course, what happened 27 February 2019. So they know Indian army is weak. India can't deliver, but it's the might, military might, big power, big democracy. It's all nothing hoax, nothing else is there.
Right, Mr. Harris, let's
Is
let's talk more about that in further detail. But I want to come back to the Constitution as well. Of course, we see the Republic Day as a celebration of the Indian Constitution coming into effect, and we know it talks about a secular state. But Farrukh, what exactly does the Constitution say? Does it even give the kind of protection or equality that we're talking about to the minorities?
Right, and Sana, that is a very good question on the eve of India's Republic Day, because it is the celebration of the Constitution, the day India became so-called republic, right? And there you actually see the biggest problem. I mean, earlier the Dalits were being mentioned, right? And let me remind everybody that B.R. Ambedkar, who was the writer of the Constitution, was himself a Dalit, and then he decided that because he was not safe, he is going to convert to Buddhism, right? And he did that. But this is exactly what happens when you actually create a beautiful document called Constitution, but that document has not evolved out of the system, or evolution has not taken place, and it has actually congealed. What happened was recently, if you just look at what happened a couple of days ago, one, at India Gate in Delhi, there was this eternal flame commemorating India's history of military, contribution to the world, and it was called Amar Jawan Jyoti. It has been extinguished, right? And in its place, who has been actually installed? Subhash Chandra Bose, a gentleman who actually contributed armed forces to Nazis and Japanese Axis powers. He has been installed there. His statue has been installed there. What does it signify? They actually empathize with the idea of the current Indian government actually empathize with the Nazis and all that.
Yeah.
Right. With that, they have also removed a very important retreat, band that actually is played at the Republic Day. It was called Abide By Me. It was Gandhi's favorite. And they have replaced it with what? Vande Mataram. There's a history of Vande Mataram being used against the minorities of the country. So at this moment, unlike the US Constitution, the British Constitution, which evolved out of the struggles of people, India's Constitution, despite being a beautiful document, has been destroyed by these vandals who are now ruling India. And they have actually, they are sympathizers of Nazis, they are sympathizers of the fascistic worldview, and they actually keep on instilling their agenda. Remember that upper caste Hindus are only 5% in India, but this is an elite capture where Dalits, who are actually in majority, have been marginalized, who have been totally, brutalized at this moment. That goes for the minorities as well, Muslims, for example, Christians, Buddhists also, Sikhs. Everyone has been stigmatized, and this is how India is and where India is right now.
Yeah, Sana, if you allow me, I just
Faisal.
wanted to add something, especially related to Sikhism. If we go back to January 1930, Nehru, of course, he promised and he talked with the Master Tara Singh, and he said that in future, of course, the Sikh, they can, taste or experience the glow of the freedom. These were his words at that time. But when the time came, you know what they did? They simply said that, oh, our constitution, especially Article 25B, it will consider them actually a sect of Hinduism. And in today's India, there are different speeches as well available, online everywhere, in which the Hindutva ideology, it actually tells everyone that Sikhs are actually Shudra Jats who converted into Sikhism. So they are considering them a sect, and which sect? Shudras, that happens to be no different from Dalits. So I think in today's India, Sikhs, they need to look into these facts.
Right.
If they are being considered as part of India, on what terms they are being considered as part of India?
Just to add to this, if you read Golbalkar's book, which has been repeatedly mentioned, he actually makes a point of actually first appreciating or praising the Nazis for their race pride, and then he said something else. There is a lesson for the Indians there that minorities, either they should convert to Hinduism or then they should live without any rights, ready to be expelled by anybody, anytime. And then, of course, the entry level is where if you convert to Hinduism, you are supposed to be Shudras or you are supposed to be Dalits. So that means that no matter what, you can never be an equal citizen.
Right.
While
So
you're living in
the options themselves are so limited. Mr. Haris, with regards to the kind of situation that we all understand exists there, is this true for all political parties in India? The entire political spectrum in India shares the same kind of view or same kind of ideology, or is this specific to the regime that we see right now? Is there any difference?
No, it's only for BJP. It's only for BJP. I think this Congress policy was definitely, it was not like that. They had believed in a secular India, and there was no problem with Muslims and of course Sikhs and Christians and Dalits and all over the India and Kashmir particularly. So the point is, it is their ideology because they drawing ideology from Nazis. And the day Narendra Modi visited Israel, that was the day they decided to behave like Israelis, like the way they behave with Palestinians. So they started doing in Kashmir, and ultimately I think they got the tip from there that okay, revoke 370 3035A and go and do what will, nothing will happen. They had the tacit approval of Americans. That happened also. And realizing that Pakistan is alone, nobody is going to support it. They have less support from even Muslim. So
Right, but
that was the
even
reason
so, the
first.
atrocities in Kashmir have been continuing for decades.
Definitely, they were doing it, and they had very clear that Kashmir is their part, but still, it was not that level where BJP started out. And then, of
Okay.
course, after that, they were realizing and they were doing it in a very planned way. They had sent a lot of forces. They enrolled RRS Gundas over there, and they are being sent in uniform. They're causing atrocities, and the amount of atrocities now they're having is going to have a boiling point. And the only thing is that when China jumps in, then of course Pakistan will have to stand more, and then we have to activate the world community and that the human rights organization, the champion of human rights organization, they are looking other way, and that's what is the actually surprising thing. How the Europe talks about Kashmir, the about the women in Afghanistan, they are worried about their human rights. And what about the human rights of Kashmiris? The way they are being blinded with pellet guns, the way they are being killed, they all orchards, fruit orchards have been razed to ground. They've used cutting machine, they've razed to ground. Their businesses are totally destroyed. The youth is being killed or they've been imprisoned and taken to different prisons in India. Then of course, what the ladies and they are doing it. Ultimately, somebody has to take stand. Till what time they'll keep fighting alone? Somebody has to stop them because in Geneva, it is their right to stand against occupation and they can go for armed struggle. That is their right. It is given. What India did in Bangladesh, they asked for it. They went. They said, okay, they are the Pakistan's occupation forces, so we are going to help you out. So the problem is we have to create the worst first thinking change. We have to change the thinking, and for that we have to do a lot. Our foreign office has to plan different or groups of senators and
Right,
MPs with
absolutely.
communication skills.
Brigadier Harris, sir, am I right when I say this, that last year, end of last year, Communist Party of China's, its convention took place in which they gave a new map, and of course there are certain places within Arunachal Pradesh, and they nominated them with new names of the Chinese name, and China implemented that on 1st of January this year. And according to this policy and this strategy, what they want is whatever is in the new map, they want to get a hold of it. Should India be worrying on this Republic Day that they are going to lose some of their land very soon, sir?
They have already lost a lot of chunk of territory. And what the Chinese have done, they have planned it properly. And what they have done, line of actual control, Indians actually they provocated. They were bringing their tanks, they were taking their air bases, they were bringing their heavy guns, they were making all roads. And of course, that was threatened. And the main purpose was, what China and Pakistan thought was that they are threatening our CPEC, which is very close from that place. That is why Chinese came and they secured that area because China will not compromise on CPEC and Belt Road Initiative. So that was the reason. And then, of course, they have planned it properly. Now they're going gradually. They have taught the world, they've taught Indians that you can't do it, you can't stop them. You're unfit for war. Your army is not trained. You're professionally not sound. Your leadership is scared. Your political leadership try to hide whatever the defeat they faced over there. So now Chinese are coming up. They have very clear, and I think likewise China will have to support Pakistan more aggressively. The problem Chinese are that they don't go into the conflict. Basically, they go for economic development, and see what has happened. America has
Right.
fought.
Let me come back to what I was initially also discussing with you, Mr. Harris. Farrukh, when we see that, of course, the BJP, of course, their regime has increased or advanced the kind of atrocities that we've seen in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and the overall discrimination and violence against minorities in the country. Does this mean that there is hope if the BJP loses power in India and we have another political party coming into power? Does this mean that this Hindutva ideology or the Hindu Rashtra that is trying to be created in the country is going to fall?
Right, and I think this actually can connect with what was being said earlier
Yeah.
about Bangladesh and other India's neighbors. By definition, one of the characteristics of any kind of fundamentalist orthodoxy, or for that matter, populist orthodoxy, is that it actually functions by the virtue of exclusion. It identifies people and declares them cultural others, not their own, right? And this has been happening. It started with Kashmir, it continued with other places, and this is what is happening at this moment with the neighbors of India as well. India's present government has repeatedly, one by one, alienated everybody. And remember, there's a striking contrast. Look at America, look at Europe, look at even China, right? Countries that actually start moving upward, especially the democracies, they actually spread wealth. For example, Japan, they, this Asian tigers, how did they actually evolve? When Japan decided that it is going to graduate to more, mechanical industries rather than, dresses and all that, they actually exported that technology to their neighbors and they actually stood up, right? Likewise, America's neighbor, look at Canada, Mexico, they are doing very well. China is also spreading wealth. India is the only country which actually ensures that from Bhutan to Sri Lanka to Bangladesh to Pakistan, every neighbor actually remains paupers or poor. And that is exactly what is happening inside India as well. I think this whole facade of secularism has been pulverized by this regime. And by the time new government comes, although I have no hope from Congress either, because they are the ones who actually started all this mission, and they actually never confronted RSS the way we have confronted TTP, right? That's why the terrorists took over India's government or state, and now they are changing the character of the country. But I think that now they have actually gift wrapped Kashmir and handed over to Pakistan, and likewise India's neighbors to China.
Right.
One last question, sir. It is related to the professionalism, military professionalism, sir. We know for the fact that in the Eastern Command, of course, we had Lieutenant General Manoj Pandey from the Engineers Corps. He was Corps Commander there, sir. And very recently, he's been promoted to Vice Chief of Army Staff. Don't you think that he is someone who was there, of course, to improve the infrastructure and make the airstrips and all, but he ended up losing land to China, and here he is enjoying all of the favors of RSS because he was born in Nagpur, as RSS was born in Nagpur. Don't you think, sir, that he should have been sacked rather than getting promoted to Vice Chief of Army Staff? And there are vibes that in May he might get promoted to Chief of Army Staff, sir, because two of his seniors, they are going to get retired very soon. So don't you think that saffronization of the military, Indian military, is at a full swing because he's getting favors, sir?
Yeah, of course, it is very obvious. You see what happened? General Bimal Rawat had ordered an inquiry to be held in which they had recommended, after the debacle of Ladakh, that the Chief Army Staff and the 16 Corps Commander, we were responsible for northern areas in command, should be removed and they should be sacked. And that, of course, Rajnath wrote, Defense Minister wrote a letter to Prime Minister of Pakistan. This is the outcome of the inquiry and what is to be done. And then after 1 month, 2 months, Bimal Rawat's helicopter crashed. So it was most incompetent people over there. And they are all spreading the ideology of RRS. So things are not good in India, and there is no trust in leadership. There are a lot of things.
Brigadier Haris Nawaz, while you are actually addressing this issue, let me also ask how usual it is for any army to promote someone from engineering corps to the army chief position.
Very important.
You see, he had no experience. You see, the point is you have a fighting arms generally officer to be promoted the Chief Army Staff. Either it should be infantry or artillery or armor, because they have all coordination. They fight in close support and they carry out operations and they move in battlefield. Engineers, they provide support like mines, road, bridges, all those things they carried out. They have no practical field experience. If you promote engineer officers to Chief Army Staff, you can see what is the plight of Indian Army, and already
Exactly. So the motives, of course, become very, very obvious. Thank you so much,
last
Mr.
thing.
Harris. We have to say goodbye to Mr. Harris.
here
quickly.
I
We
just
have,
wanted
our
to mention-
next guest is
Yes.
actually joined us. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Brigadier Harris Nawaz, for joining us and being a part of the show. With regards to, of course, the second segment, we have been dealing with the terrorist situation in Pakistan for a while now. We know now that there has been a spike since August. The Interior Minister has spoken about it. He's also spoken about the government's stance as to not being completely opposed to what they call negotiations with the elements within the TTP that are willing to fall under the ambit of the constitution. So all of this, of course, is going to be an important way forward in terms of dealing with this. Another thing that is required, of course, is a unanimous front against the terrorist threat within the country, and whether or not we have that in with regards to the opposition parties and their political stance is, of course, something that we'll explore in further detail. We will be joined very soon by our guest online, but before that, let's also take a look at the consideration of dialogue with the TTP. We've seen that in the past. We've seen it happen, and we've seen it fade as well. There have been conditions and harsh conditions that have so been called, and something which is unacceptable. How are we going to go about it is something we'll discuss in further detail. For this, we have been joined by Brigadier Retired Mr. Rashid Wali Janchua. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us in today's show. With regards to the conversation around what Pakistan needs to be doing or the government needs to be doing in terms of engaging with the TTP, they've always spoken about how the dialogue option is, of course, open. Negotiations are open, but they, of course, are going to be dealt with within the constitution. Whether or not all the elements of TTP are there yet is a big question mark. Then, of course, we've seen that in the previous times, the conditions put forward by the TTP have not been acceptable. And then, of course, there are terrorist attacks that are continuing as well that the government says will be met by an equal response. Within this scenario, what sort of negotiation can tangibly take place, and what really can be the outcome of any such efforts?
The outcome is very clear. When you enter into negotiations with non-state actors who have an agenda and who want to impose their version of Sharia on settled areas in Pakistan, which have been merged now, they are no longer even former tribal areas.
Yeah.
Then it's very clear that the state cannot accede to their request, come what may, because their strategy is premised upon localized action aimed at delegitimizing the existing states, degrading trust in democracy, exploiting sectarianism, and sowing instability in its areas of influence. So why Pakistan entered into negotiations was to, give them a chance to separate irreconciliables from reconcilable elements, those who want to lay down arms and get mainstreamed. And the environment was propitious for that, because there was a government in Afghanistan which was amenable to the idea of peace, and which had professed that it would not allow its territory to be used by any militant element to conduct cross-border terrorism. So
Right.
these conditions offered an opportunity. So that opportunity was offered by Taliban through their mediatory efforts, and for that very purpose, these negotiations happened, and the
Brigadier Janjua, these points are very important, but it seems to me that we are actually focusing on the tertiary matters. Let me take you back to the origin story, because Pakistan has been combating terrorism for past 20 years. And it reminds me that there was a time before we had an NSP, there was an NISP, National Interior Security Policy. And at that time also, we kept on hearing about importance of NACTA. The biggest question, sir, right now is that 20 years we have been fighting for terrorism, and when it comes to policy, we don't have anti-terrorism czar in this country. Why is it that we don't have that kind of a nodal position that could actually set the policy and define how exactly to go about things, sir?
Yes, you're right, because there has been a bit of ambivalence on that score. But in the past, also, you know very well that there was a NISP draft which was put up for approval, and this time around, also there is a NISP which is almost ready. And presently unveiled national security policy has also given some very broad guidelines regarding internal security. We know that at strategic level, the counter-terrorism has to be undertaken by police because it's a police and intelligence, bailiwick. While at the tactical level and at the insurgency fighting level, it's paramilitary forces, it's army, and like it was done in all other insurgencies and counter-terrorism models. So there is no confusion on that score, at least, and I'm sure in due course.
But regarding the body of NACTA itself, why is it that it actually still reports to the Interior Minister rather than reporting to the Prime Minister of Pakistan? I mean, it seems to me that terrorism is a very serious issue, and we could have actually ironed out all these kinks, and through that perhaps we could have actually found some administrative solutions. So far it seems that bureaucracy is taking over everything, sir.
You see, terrorism is a multivariate phenomena. It doesn't lend itself to only kinetic solutions. So it's whole of the government, rather whole of the society approach. And
so, ergo the Prime Minister, sir, ergo the Chief Executive should be actually taking care of the office of NACTA rather than Interior Minister.
This is one option, and this was given in the past also, that whosoever is a coordinator NACTA should be under PM office so as to give a little more force and a little more traction to the counter-terrorism effort. But I think at this point of time, NACTA is more on the policy making and coordinating front. It's not a operational arm per se. So its job is more carrying out strategic surveillance, policy making, coordination, and the actual counter-terrorism operations are the responsibility of provinces, and also at the federal level, our premier intelligence agencies are involved into counter-terrorism intelligence-based operations. And we also know that there is a reality. There are capacity deficits with police, and I entirely agree with you that we need to improve the counter-terrorism capability of police at the federal and the provincial levels, so as to reduce pressure on the armed forces alone, who are at the moment bearing the maximum brunt of the counter-terrorism effort, which is
Right.
primarily
Yes,
the police.
Brigadier Janjua sir, as we know that there are two provinces of Afghanistan that are nurturing this menace of terrorism, and don't you think that it would be better to talk with the Taliban regime, Taliban setup there, and tell them, look, if we obviously counter them there and then, it would be good for us, good for you, and good for all of the neighbors, and of course the world would be taking it as a positive as well of the Taliban. Shouldn't we do that, sir, rather than waiting here so that TTP can do something here and we can counter them?
You see, we are already doing that. There have been government to government contacts. Taliban have been very clearly told that TTP menace is a real problem for us, and they need to now rein them in. Since there is no excuse now, Americans have left, and TTP has no constraints or pruded on their movement inside Afghanistan. But there are problems, there are issues, and there are limitations with Taliban also. Taliban can go up to a certain level to control TTP because of two reasons. One is that if they take action against them, there's a fear that some of the elements could go and they could band with ISKP, which is emerging as another threat for the Taliban themselves. Secondly, Taliban, they were ideological kinsmen, and TTP also helped in some ways Afghan Taliban while fighting with the external foreign forces. And for these two reasons, I think Afghan Taliban can go up to a certain level. but nevertheless, we should make it very clear to them that these are our red lines, and we would expect them to.
Right, of course, and that would be really important. Farrukh, considering the political scenario within the country, of course, we've seen that the opposition parties have planned an inflation march, and the Interior Minister has spoken about how to postpone it and to come together for the.
It is now called inflation march.
Yes, that's what I hear.
Wow. They keep on changing like
with regards to that march, whether or not it's being postponed or not is another aspect to it, of course. But does this realization actually exist that we're confronted with a threat that needs a unanimous front, or are we all together at the same page for this? Or
not at all, not at all. This is the point that I was trying to make while I was talking about NACTA and the counter-terrorism czar. My concern is that for 20 years we have been told and we have seen, given that we have buried many of our own loved ones who were killed by terrorism, that terrorism is an existential threat to the country. I mean, I haven't seen another country that doesn't respond to existential challenges in direct method, right? So far, we haven't actually come up with a very coherent strategy and organogram, so to speak. Just believe me, if NACTA was actually empowered enough, it could actually create some method to negotiate with the organizations or these banned outfits which actually were ready to lay off their weapons and surrender, right? We haven't come up with that. Then what you do, you actually outsource the matter to the local jirgas, and that is not a great idea. But regarding our political parties, I think that all these parties from time to time have been placating these groups. They have been using religion as well, and that's why every time they are in opposition, they actually decide that terrorism is not a threat. But let me go back to Brigadier Saab's point. Brigadier Saab, earlier you were saying that Taliban don't want to take on the TTP because then they would actually, turn on them and join ISIS. Sir, you're telling me that the mighty organization that took on the global coalition of governments cannot actually take care of this matter?
They are taking care of that matter partially.
So why afraid of it?
In some actions inside Afghanistan, we have seen Khalid Balti getting eliminated, and there are those elements which are truculent and they are being dealt with accordingly, but they have to go very intelligently about this matter because there is a clear and present danger from ISKP, and which is being helped by foreign elements as well.
I get that. But my humble question is, remember when Ashraf Ghani government was there was a multi-national coalition forces there.
Right.
And then there was support from the Indian RAW to the intelligence agency, NDS as well. Despite that, they kept on fighting them and they never had any kind of reluctance. Why is it that all of a sudden, when they are victors, they have turned into these people who are too careful about things or not alienating our enemies, while Pakistan has been championing their cause, Afghanistan's cause, for past many months?
You see why this is happening. It's because of the old, the history. That is the TTP. There were elements on Pakistani soil were openly crossing, and they had that ideological affinity. It will take time, and Taliban will not allow them beyond a certain level to, the space would be squeezed for them. But to say that Taliban would take kinetic action against them and enter into a conflict, I think they are not in a position at the moment because they are not very stable themselves. And there are foreign...
Right. Mr. Janjua, just one question. Mr. Janjua, with regards to Pakistan's reliance or Pakistan's hope for any sort of help or facilitation from the current regime in Afghanistan, does this mean that there would be absolutely no benefit with involving the Taliban regime in Afghanistan for our conversations with the TTP?
No, there's one big benefit, and that is there is no RAW, there is no NDS support, there are no elements of foreign intelligence agencies which are actively abetting and encouraging and funding. So that
This makes it worse.
that support is dried up. This is a big advantage for you in Pakistan.
No,
Now,
sir,
How so?
but it makes it worse that people who are not being aided by any foreign elements are allowing stronghold to people who might be attacking us and killing us.
see, that is for us to then take care, because one is on the border management, second is our counter-terrorism part. These are this is a campaign that they have launched, a spike that we have experienced. We have experienced 56% rise in 2021 compared to 2020. But this is their last hurrah. Let me tell you, they are disorganized, demoralized also, and these pen pricks, they are doing their best to create some kind of impact to emphasize their relevance. The attack in Islamabad, the attack in Lahore, I mean, these are all desperate measures of a dying organization. And these embers we need to extinguish further by a concerted counter-terrorism effort, and at the same time supporting the best governance efforts of the government. We should
Brigadier
Brigadier
Janjua, very quickly, if you think that this is a dying organization, must we actually engage in any kind of dialogue at all? Let them die first?
dialogue, yes, because there are certain elements which could be won over, and the tribes,
After they have been defeated, sir.
after they have been defeated, because there are some people that you would need to be mainstreamed, and you should do so. And there are some irreconcilables for those involved in heinous crimes. Those should never be left alone, and they should be fought.
All right, we're almost out of time. One last question from Faisal. Yes, sir.
Yeah, one last question, sir, with two parts. A, earlier you were mentioning that, of course, nobody is there now, no raw NDS and CIA, no one is there. But to me, if I talk about the intelligence perspective, if we talk about how intelligence works with the source planted, sir. Don't you think that in current regime, it has become more easier for all of these intelligence agencies to work within Afghanistan, number one? And number two, sir, would you agree with me when I say that there are two factions of TTP? One is the one which actually is shaking hands with Taliban, and they can talk to Taliban. But there is another one which is sitting with ISIS Khorasan in Nangarhar and in Kunar province, and they are the ones who would never talk to Taliban. Shouldn't we dealing with them there and then, sir?
Nangarhar, Jozjan, Kunar, there are three places where there is ISKP problem, and we all know that TTP renegade elements, they joined ISKP. Taliban are dealing with them in their own way, and this will continually happens, and there would be certain elements which are too truculent, too refractory, and those would never be won over by any blandishments. So come what may, they will join ISKP, and Taliban will take care of them. We are talking of those elements who are still capable of laying down arms, surrendering, becoming part of the mainstream. I think we should concentrate on those.
And then this demarcation is, of course, a big question mark. Thank you so much, Brigadier Janjua, for joining us and being part of the show. Before we conclude, Farrukh, with regards to the kind of strategy that the government has in place with dealing with the TTP, negotiating with them, also giving an equal response, also bringing together different groups that can reconcile those who can, it seems quite chaotic at the moment. Is that so, or is there a way to look at it differently, where we know that there are step A, step B, step C, the way that it's going forward?
No, when you are talking about the government's policy, let me remind everybody that it is supposed to be national policy if there is one, right?
Yeah.
And I think that I am still studying the government's and the state's attitude towards these matters. But it reminds me of one joke or one modelistic story.
Okay.
That one person was a good swimmer, and he was about to cross a river. Somebody told him that if you don't reach the bank of the river on the other side by the sunset, turn back and come back, right? And he kept on swimming the entire day, and he was, by the sunset, he was only 10 meters away from the other bank. He decided that day sunset, he returned and came back and drowned. So my problem is, if you have continued a policy for 20 years, why not see it through?
Yes,
now
Faisal, quickly, last comment.
Yeah, one last comment about what obviously Interior Minister is requiring from PDM. to me, I think if situation is that dire, then PDM must not do a march in March, because if the situation is as such, then it should be perceived, if they do it, then it should be perceived that they were looking for something as such, and they should be held responsible for that.
Well, let's see if we can actually hope for some that sort of a maturity from the political parties and the PTM. But of course, that is the hope. We want Pakistan to progress, and for that we need a responsible opposition. That is the hope. Let's see whether or not that actually happens. Thank you so much for watching the debate. We'll see you tomorrow once again at 9. Stay tuned.